Well, unelected federal employees have enormous power over our lives with huge numbers of rules and regulations. Well, that may be about to change. It's in the next term. The Supreme Court will hear a case that could finally rein in the so-called nanny state. Jennifer Wishon brings us the story.
Commercial fishermen have long been uncomfortable with a law that lets government monitors board their vessels to observe the fish they catch. Fishermen say if that wasn't bad enough, the National Marines Fisheries Service passed a rule that requires them to pay the wages of the monitors, who are taking a seat on their boats that could otherwise go to a paying customer, a burden that can add up to a whopping $700 every day.
There's going to be plenty of trips that monitor will make more than myself or my crew.
Stefan Axelsson and other herring fishermen from Cape May, New Jersey sued over the rule, and their case will be heard before the Supreme Court, where it will be argued by famed appellate lawyer Paul Clement.
When you have the federal government directly regulating small businesses, it's just not a fair fight.
But instead of just hearing the specifics of this case alone, justices have chosen to take on the bigger issue by reviewing the power of the entire federal bureaucracy, specifically considering one of the most important and powerful principles in the world of bureaucratic rulemaking, known as the Chevron doctrine. It comes from a 1984 case in which the High Court developed a rule for lower courts to follow that says if a law passed by Congress isn't clear or is silent on a given issue, then courts should accept what a government agency thinks that law means. That High Court ruling gave Washington bureaucracies wide latitude over the years to come with their own interpretations of various laws, potentially strengthening their own powers.
I mean, in a system where we're trying to protect the liberty of the individuals, you would think that the rule is if the statute's unclear, the tie ought to go to the citizen, not that the tie ought to go to the government.
The Chevron doctrine is so interwoven into American case law, it's been cited more than 80,000 times. A decision by the Supreme Court to scrap it would send shockwaves through the halls of Congress and the White House, potentially upending the way both branches implement policy. That's because they both use Washington's massive administrative state to their advantage. Congress often passes vague laws, leaving the details up to federal bureaucrats, a process that gives members political cover when the final product ends up hurting well-meaning citizens. Presidents also use agencies to bypass Congress to advance their agendas. In fact, the current court has already shown its frustration with the Chevron doctrine. In a 2013 dissent, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, "The administrative state with its reams of regulations would leave the founders rubbing their eyes," and continued, "The danger posed by the growing power of the administrative state cannot be dismissed." But James Goodwin with the Center for Progressive Reform warns getting rid of Chevron altogether could invite chaos and even judicial activism if judges, inexperienced in administrative law, are given room to impose their policy preferences for that of Congress's. He tells CBN News, "That's like having baseball umpires figuring out the finer contours of what constitutes a reception in the NFL. That is no way to run a legal system." Fitzhenry argues the power of federal agencies should be put back under the Constitution, no longer operating as a parallel government run by unelected bureaucrats.
When we as average citizens tolerate that, however slowly, it's allowing a different type of government to form alongside the constitutional infrastructure that we've come to appreciate.
He points to the Department of Labor's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for certain employers that caused such a stir. It was a rule made by a federal agency that affected a huge number of Americans, and many argue blatantly violated their constitutional rights. At that time, Congress was in session and had the ability to make such a requirement, but chose not to. And studies show agencies win in lower courts more often than not.
You know, it's hard enough to call your congressperson and get their attention, but try getting a hold of some regulator at the National Marines Fisheries Service or the Environmental Protection Agency or fill in the blank. And they're not responsive.
The Supreme Court could completely scrap Chevron or just weaken it after it hears arguments in its next term. Whatever the outcome, the ruling could affect Americans in all walks of life for decades to come. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
Well, I hope the Supreme Court overturns the Chevron doctrine. Our state bureaucracies have gotten out of hand, and whether it's the federal level or even the state level, they are not responsive to you as a citizen. In fact, they don't even view you as having rights. I know this personally. If you think having a monitor on board a commercial fishing vessel, I had a tiny little boat that I'd take out in the Chesapeake Bay. I paid my taxes on that. I paid for the fishing license for the boat. But the game and fishery group pulled up next to me. I was anchored up. They literally circled my boat, cut the lines, then boarded my boat and wanted to see all my registrations. I wasn't a citizen in their eyes. I was some kind of perpetrator. That's how we've gone in this nation. Nobody recognizes our rights anymore. We are to be regulated, and instead of freedom, you have this incredible oppression through regulation and through the actions of state employees who say we're in charge and you're not. And we've got to turn this around. We, the people of the United States of America, we come together and form the government that we want. We form the rules that we want to live under. And when you give that authority to unelected employees, well, then you have transferred sovereignty from the people of the United States to unelected employees who can't ever get out of their office. They are there for life. This should change. It should come under congressional regulation. If they're going to impose laws, and laws that have very serious consequences, whether it's fines or criminal penalties, or you lose your right to actually keep your own boat, all of these things, no. You have to actually pass a law, and some representative that I can vote for or vote against has to say, I support this particular legislation. That's the bicameral framework that the founders put in place. They did not put in place, let's create a federal bureaucracy that's going to run